Hello lovely people, welcome to another book chat, the regular roundup of stuff I've read at some point in my past.
Doobie 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 Sophie vlogs.
Just before I dive into the books, I'm aware that I've gone over 100 book chats by now, and I don't know whether to keep numbering them or to not just stop and just have them as book chats. Maybe let me know your thoughts on that. I don't know. I'm having a crisis because we've reached 100. So, I have two fiction books and one non-fiction book to talk about. Let's kick things off with a booktube fave, Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo. I really enjoyed Six of Crows. It definitely takes a while to get going, which I didn't mind when I read it, but you have a lot of time that is sort of delving into character backstories. This one really kicked into the action a lot quicker. I'm going to talk about this in a spoiler-free manner because it is the second book of a duology, but suffice to say, Six of Crows follows this ragtag group of criminals who have been hired to do this impossible heist. It ends on a bit of a cliffhanger, so I meant to pick this up much sooner than I actually did. I get distracted because I'm a mood reader, and that meant that when I did eventually pick this up, I think it took me a slight bit of time just to settle in and sort of remember all the characters again. I just had to remember some of the characterizations and that sort of thing. But I ended up, by the time I actually settled into this, I had a really fun time. One thing I really liked about this is, again, whereas that first book had sort of that slower character-based start point, this one I just felt we really just kicked into gear from the get-go, and it was very fast-paced. There was always stuff happening. One of the appeals of this is sort of that way that Kaz is always trying to think 2 steps ahead of the people that they're up against. So there are a lot of moments where you think the plan is going one way, and then things are revealed and it looks like it's in jeopardy, but then it's oh no, wait, we planned for this, which I think some people could find annoying, but personally I just got really swept up in it, and I just had a really fun time being I wonder what's gonna happen. At the time I'm recording this, Shadow and Bone TV show has not been released yet, but the trailer has, and that's why I read this, because I was I need to read this before spoilers abound. And I definitely find myself really interested to see how this plotline is adapted in the TV show. I think it's potentially one that's going to work really well. I knew one spoiler going into this that is a thing that happens to a character, but I didn't know which character it happened to. And I think because I knew about it, when that moment actually happened, I didn't feel a huge amount. Partly because I had been expecting something to happen, and when you're I know X piece of information, but I don't know who it applies to, I think part of my brain spent a lot of this book sort of crossing off people that it could apply to based on narratively what was happening. So the person that it did happen to, I was okay, you were one of my candidates. So I think that sort of lessened the blow. And then also the way it kind of happened did feel a little bit anticlimactic, which is some ways quite interesting. I think that's an interesting choice. There could have been a big dramatic thing, but instead we're sort of subverting that. So I'm kind of intrigued by that. But yeah, it was definitely an interesting moment. I'm not sure I have too much else to say about this. I don't think I love this quite as much as a lot of people on BookTube do, and that's totally fine, but I definitely had a really fun time with it, and I think it's one that if I was to do a reread, I would potentially love even more, because I think one of the really strong bits about this, if you like this book, it's probably because you really like the characters, and I think they're such an essential part of it, and so I think rereading it will be one where I'll root myself in those characters even more, because I definitely forgot some things, and then I had to remember who people were to each other. But that's fine. It was an interesting time. After that is a book that I absolutely loved. I gave this 5 stars. This is The Grass Dancer by Susan Power. Susan Power is a member of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, and this tells the story, well, the thing is the blurb says that this is set on a North Dakota reservation. It tells the interweaving histories of Sioux men and women from the 1860s to the early 1980s. And I think that I thought that we were going to have the 1860s plotline first, and then we were just sort of going to jump forward in time to the 1980s, but that's not what this is, and I loved what it was so much. So you actually start at the most contemporary point, so you start in this 1980s plotline, and then each chapter takes you back and back in time, and usually it's just by a handful of years, maybe 5 years or so, and usually each chapter is from a different person's perspective. And I found that framing so interesting because you get to see ramifications, but in reverse, and you get to see the way that different people perceive each other and how correct are these perceptions, and then also like how people become. One of the characters in the first chapter, Harley Windsoldier, his father and brother died in an accident that happens. That's the very first part of this book, is that accident happening, and as a result his mother has never spoken since, and he has one understanding of this situation and of why his mother doesn't speak, and it's really something that has affected him, that has affected his whole life and the way he carries himself and the way he approaches the world. And then you reach a point in this when you stepped back far enough and you understand a key piece of information about all of these relationships, and then a few chapters later you get a different piece of information, and suddenly this boy's understanding of why his mother doesn't speak and how much he's internalized that, and then you realize how much he's completely misread that situation, and then it made me so emotional. There are so many moments like that where you suddenly, because you're getting it from someone else's perspective, you suddenly get missing puzzle pieces that flesh out your full picture, but no one in this has the full picture. Whether that's because of like lack of communication or like inability to communicate because maybe people are no longer there, that sort of thing. And it was just, I just found that such an interesting way of telling a story, and in some ways you could just view this as like interconnected vignettes, a little bit like stuff like Girl, Woman, Other did a similar thing where you have these different perspectives that all sort of center around a point, but it's just moments. Also like The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett kind of does that a bit, where you have these like it's from different people's perspectives and you get different views on the same situations, and it really aids your understanding. I've realised that actually that's a form that, if it's done really well, I think can be so effective, and I think that this one was. Another thing I really liked about this was just the characterization. Even though you're only getting glimpses of people, I felt like there was such depth to these characters. There's one figure in this, Mercury, who is viewed with a lot of fear by a lot of people because she has power, and she doesn't necessarily use this power in a way that is viewed as good. She would be a very easy figure to just fully villainize, but this text deals with her in such a nuanced way, and when you get to see things from her perspective, you get such an understanding of why she does what she does. And I just felt like everyone in this felt so real to me, and I loved it. This is a book that was on my radar because of Danny at Thunderbird Woman Read. I'll link her review down below as well. I could probably gush about this book a lot more, but I will rein myself in because I just thought it was really brilliant. I really do want to read more of Susan Power's work, and I would heartily recommend this if it sounds like your cup of tea. Finally, I read a non-fiction book on my phone on Libby, and that is Disfigured, on Fairy Tales, Disability and Making Space by Amanda Leduc, which is Amanda Leduc's series of essays that is looking at fairy tales and the relationship with disability and disfigurement. I thought this was great. I also gave this one 5 stars just because I thought it was doing a really great job at what it wanted to do. Each essay has sort of a different focus. It focuses on both like really old fairy tales, like the Brothers Grimm, Charles Perrault, stuff like that, but then also it does bring it up to modern day. It's looking at stuff like Disney, it's looking at Marvel, it's looking at superheroes. One topic that I've identified that I want to just like read more and gain a better understanding of is disability rights and disability activism and stuff like this. So I think she did a really good job of sort of like breaking down some sort of key terms. So if you're someone who's not read a huge amount about disability activism, she breaks down like different like models of disability and stuff like this, and I thought that that was really helpful. Some of these topics I felt like I kind of already had a bit of an understanding of from watching some of Jen Campbell's videos on the subjects, because there's definitely like an overlap there on content, whereas others were really exploring like topics and relationships in a way that I'd never thought about before and that I found really illuminating. So yeah, I don't have a huge amount to say on this just because I think what it did really well. It definitely gave me a lot to think about in the way that, we can be quite dismissive of stories sometimes and be like, oh, it's just stories, no one believes these things are real. And it's like, it's not about believing something is real, it's about these narratives that shape us, that shape our culture, that shape our attitudes towards people, being perpetuated, and how can we break these down and how can we analyse the harmful aspects of them and then work to do better and, make new stories that mean that people can see themselves and don't get treated as other and that sort of thing. So it's just a collection that, although it's very small, I felt like it really packed a punch and did a really good job. So I'm really glad I read it. Those are all the books I wanted to talk about this week. As per usual, I would really love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below if you would like to chat about any of them. Otherwise, I hope you're having a really lovely day, and I will see you next time for something different.